Greeting Legacy family and friends, I pray that you're well. Our constant prayer is that God's grace is upon you and He's upholding you and using you these days, these very, very interesting, trying days. You know that yesterday was the beginning of a week that has come to be known as Holy Week or Passion Week, as we commemorate, more than commemorate, but we focus upon and benefit from focusing upon the last week of Jesus' earthly ministry, the things He did and said, His sacrifice on the cross, leading to next week's celebration of His victory over death, and therein lies our victory and our great hope. But at the end of yesterday's passage, or the passages that record what happened on that Sunday, that which has come to be known as Palm Sunday, the narration wraps up with Jesus dismounting from that donkey, walking into the temple, looking around, and leaving. Monday morning, He and His make their way back into Jerusalem because He has unfinished business. Even riding on that colt, as meek and lowly as He might have looked to others, He knew full well what He had come to do. Among other things, He came as judge. And all that He was doing that week, among other things, was prefiguring a judgment that was yet to come, and get glimpses of it all through this week, that Jesus was full aware of who He was and what it was that He came to achieve. He came to judge a fallen religious system that was nothing more than a religious system. He came to judge sin. And He did so thoroughly on the cross. And we're going to get there on Friday, I promise you. But on Monday, He makes His way back in. And with all that's going on around Him and all the significance of all that He does during that week, we see Him pause in one of the most curious moments of Scripture, when Jesus doesn't just look at, but He interacts with a tree. Mark Chapter 11, beginning in verse 12, tells it this way. On the following day, when they came from Bethany, He was hungry, and seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, He went to see if He could find anything on it. When He came to it, He found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And He said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And His disciples heard it. You've probably heard 100 good sermons on that passage and the subsequent verses. But I just want to set our focus on this. Jesus thought it was a good use of time, very limited time, that He had at this point, to stop and look at this tree and speak to this tree, not because Jesus made a practice of speaking to inanimate objects that way, but because He was prefiguring a judgment that He would act out a little further in His visiting of the temple in just a little while, and flipping the tables and causing a great upheaval there, and calling out the religious system for being nothing more than just a new cottage industry, a way where people could come during great feasts like the Passover that was going on in those days, and they could profiteer, and they could go home wealthier than they showed up, which was quite the opposite of what God had in mind. Jesus says that temple was to be a house of prayer for the nations. And when Jesus speaks of a house of prayer, He goes way beyond the temple, because the nations is a reference to the world, and the household that He speaks of is now His church. That was God's intention, and His intention would not be thwarted. And on the way to God achieving the creation, the sustaining, the building, the sanctifying of His church, He would first judge a religious system that had strayed from God. So what He did in speaking to the tree was a foretaste of what He did when He spoke to those in the temple. And even that is a foretaste of what He will do when He returns. Jesus, meek and lowly, sacrificial lamb that He is, knows, has always known, that He comes to judge the hearts of men and women. And we're grateful. We're so grateful because we look at this Monday in the light of Friday and even the coming Sunday. We know that because Jesus went to the cross and because Jesus vacated that tomb, our sin is no longer held against us. We know that any good works done by us are done by him, by his Spirit, through our lives. And so all glory goes to him. We know that our shame and our failures were taken care of and nailed to that tree. We know all these things, but let not the principle be lost here. Jesus still deserves fruit. He's the Lord. I think it's fascinating that Mark records that when Jesus went to this tree, expected fruit, didn't find fruit, curses the tree. All of this happens in a season when ordinarily people did not expect figs. It was not the season for figs. And what's he saying? Is he being unfair? No, he's being Lord. And the Lord comes at a time when he says is season for fruit, and he has every right to expect it. Again, don't let the principle slip through our fingers. Otherwise, we end up like that Jewish system. From a distance, it looked so fruitful. It looked so full of sustenance, and it just appeared to be all that it announced, and it was nothing but leaves. And Jesus is very clear about how he feels about us just putting on appearances. I think it's fascinating what these days have done to us. We can't even have the leaves, the trappings, all of the lights and lasers that so many have come accustomed to and require and demand from churches anymore. That's gone. That's been stripped away. And whether or not there's fruit, that is coming to the fore. It's becoming increasingly clear that none of those things matter. They didn't matter to Christ. They don't now, and they shouldn't matter to us. Fruit, much fruit, to the glory of his name. That's what he wants. That's what we want for him, for the glory of his name and the service of others around us. So I invite you today, this Monday of Holy Week, to stop and look. What's your leaves to fruit ratio? Turn to Jesus. He's for you. He's for you to be more than apparently fruitful, but to be truly fruitful. He wants that. As a matter of fact, he's Lord, and he requires that. But in his grace, by his Spirit, he empowers us for that. Talk about this with your family. Talk about it with God in prayer. Stop and meditate and look at your life through his eyes. Ask him to give you discernment, humility, and gratitude for all that he's done. Let's together bear fruit for the glory of his name. We'll try and post a few more of these this week just so that we can walk together devotionally, setting our minds and our hearts upon Christ and all that he's done. Love you, miss you desperately, trusting God with you, and one way or another, we will be together again. God bless you and keep you.